Chairman Kang, you need to come home now. There are 3 children in your mother's east wing, and Madam Kang is on her knees in front of the wife you let walk away. The call came through his private line at 6:14 in the evening, cutting across the silence of his armored sedan as it moved through the rain-slicked streets of Seoul. Kang Jun-seo did not answer at first. Men had lied to him before. Rivals had tried to bait him into panic before. But Attorney Han never used that voice unless the ground was already shifting under the house. Then the older man said the one sentence that made even Kang Jun-seo stop breathing for half a second. Your ex-wife had triplets. 3 years, 2 months, and 6 days earlier, Amara Johnson had walked out of the Kang family mansion with 1 suitcase and no goodbye. 3 years, 2 months, and 6 days. The kind of number a man only remembers when the past never actually left him. The kind of number that makes you do the math before your mind is ready for the answer. Triplets. Not 1 child hidden in some quiet city. 3. And not in the world, somewhere beyond his reach. In his mother's house, under his own name, without his permission. Under his roof, in the only place where power had once belonged completely to the woman who raised him. If that sentence just hit you in the chest, stay with this one. Because what waited in that house was bigger than a secret child and heavier than an old marriage. Subscribe to Aurora Love Saga for more stories like this. By the time his sedan turned through the black iron gates of the Kang estate, the rain had thinned into a fine silver mist. The mansion in Hanamdong stood exactly as it always had. Stone, symmetry, discipline. The kind of house that did not look built so much as enforced. Warm lights glowed behind paper-paneled doors in the east wing. Security had already pulled back. No raised voices, no public scene. That was how the Kang family liked its disasters. Private, polished, expensive. Jun-seo stepped out without waiting for an umbrella. His men moved with him, then stopped when he lifted 1 finger. He entered the main hall alone, shoes clicking once against the polished floor before the house swallowed the sound. He passed the ancestral display cabinet, the lacquered chest, the old framed calligraphy his mother loved because it said, "Discipline survives where emotion fails." Then he heard it. A child laughing. Not 1. 3 small voices layered over each other, bright, quick, alive. 1 higher, 1 stubbornly loud, 1 softer with little pauses in between, as if that child was thinking before every word. And just like that, the most feared man in Seoul's shadow economy stood in his own childhood home, feeling like a stranger at the door. But that wasn't the part that unsettled him most. The east parlor doors were open. Inside, the air smelled faintly of warm milk, baby soap, and the ginseng tea his mother drank every evening at the same hour. 3 little children sat on a thick cream rug beside a low table scattered with wooden animal blocks. 1 girl had a braid tied with a yellow ribbon. A boy was lining blocks into a perfect straight row, correcting the angle whenever it shifted. The smallest girl was holding a picture book upside down with complete confidence. And on the other side of the room, beside the window where the rain traced lines across the glass, Madam Kang Hwa-young was kneeling. Not gracefully seated, not lowered with ceremonial control. Kneeling, her back was straight from habit, but her hands were trembling on her lap. And standing in front of her, dressed in a charcoal coat and cream trousers, her face calm in the way still water can look calm right before winter freezes it over, was Amara Johnson. His wife. No, his ex-wife, the law would say. No, worse than that, the woman whose dignity he had once watched being crushed in this very house while he did nothing. Amara looked at him only after a beat, not shocked, not angry, not relieved. Her gaze crossed his face with terrifying steadiness, as if she had already imagined this moment 100 times and had no interest in giving it more power than it deserved. The little boy on the rug looked up first. "Mama," he said, pointing at Junseo with total, innocent seriousness. "That man has my eyebrows." If there had still been any blood in Junseo's face, it left then. And yes, if you're wondering whether a man like him could be brought to his knees by a 3-year-old with a toy tiger in his hand, the answer is yes. Just not in the way anyone expected. His mother rose before he could speak, one hand braced against the edge of the tea table. Pride was still stitched into every movement she made, but something inside it had frayed. Attorney Han stood near the door with a sealed folder. A housemaid stared resolutely at the floor. No one else dared breathe too loudly. Amara broke the silence first. "This isn't a reunion," she said. "It's a negotiation." Junseo's voice came out lower than usual. "You disappeared." Amara's expression did not change. "I survived." The yellow-ribboned girl looked between them, sensing something adults always thought children missed. She stood, walked straight to Amara, and held onto her coat with one small hand. The smallest girl copied her, because triplets learn each other before they learn the world. The boy stayed on the rug, still staring at Junseo with that dangerous, uncanny mirror of his own face. Madame Kang lifted her chin. "They are Kang blood." Amara turned toward her without heat, which was worse than heat. "They are my children before they are anyone's bloodline." And right there, in a room where Amara had once been made to feel small, the balance of power was not in the Kang Empire, not in the mother. Not even in the man who could ruin markets with a phone call. It was in the woman who no longer needed any of them. So the real question was no longer whether Junseo had children. It was why the woman who vanished from his life had returned only after building one he could not control. 3 years earlier, when Kang Junseo married Amara Johnson, Seoul called it many things, and almost none of them kind. The public version was easy enough to print. She was educated, elegant, bilingual, the daughter of a late diplomat and a literature professor, raised between Seoul, London, and Accra, a woman who worked in arts education and carried herself with the kind of quiet that made noisy people underestimate her. He was the cold heir of a family whose legitimate business empire covered the skeleton of older, darker loyalties. Shipping routes, debt settlements, political leverage, favors that lasted generations. On paper, the marriage looked improbable, but fashionable. A headline, a curiosity, proof that powerful men sometimes surprised people. The private version was uglier. The Kang family's social circle spoke about Amara in lowered voices that somehow always reached the right ears. Too foreign, too soft, too different, too visible, too hard to place in the polished old hierarchy that governed Seoul's most guarded homes. Women who smiled at galas turned away to ask each other whether she knew the proper tea service order in a formal Korean household. Men with old money assessed her not as a person, but as a risk. Could she adapt? Could she produce heirs? Could she disappear if the family required it? Jun Seo heard all of it. He ignored all of it. He mistook that for love. That was his first failure. Because silence can look noble to the person not being cut by it. He had met Amara at a restoration fundraiser held in a converted Hanok gallery near Bukchon, one of those charity evenings where old Seoul liked to pretend it still had a soul. She had been standing near a folding screen painted with cranes, speaking to an elderly donor in careful Korean, both hands around a teacup, posture respectful, eyes bright with patience. She listened fully. That was what he noticed first. Not beauty, though she had it. Not poise, though it moved with her. It was the way she listened, like the world had not yet taught her to expect disappointment. He had asked her, bluntly, whether she knew who he was. She had said, yes. He had asked, "Does that concern you?" And she had answered, "It depends on whether you think being feared is the same thing as being understood." Nobody spoke to him like that. Not in business, not in family, not in the rooms where men watched his hands more carefully than his face. But Amara had looked at him without flattery, without performance, and something inside him, which had spent years becoming harder than necessary, recognized something it had not known it missed. He pursued her carefully at first, then intensely. She resisted not because she did not feel it, but because she did. She knew enough about power to know how love could disappear inside it. He assured her he was different with her. For a while, it was true. The nights they spent away from cameras were never loud. He liked driving with no destination after midnight, down the river roads where the Han caught the city lights and broke them into moving gold. She liked quiet bookstores, small restaurants where nobody cared who entered, rainy afternoons in his penthouse when the city turned gray and distant, and the whole world felt, for an hour at least, like something they were building together instead of defending. When he married her, he gave her a ring without spectacle and a promise without witnesses. "You will never have to bow for a place in my life." That promise would come back later, like a blade with his own fingerprints on it. But before it broke, it almost became a home. Amara tried. That mattered, even if no one in that family deserved how hard she tried. She learned the rhythm of the Kang household with the care of someone who respected culture without letting it erase her. She greeted elders properly. She received tea with two hands. She changed into indoor slippers without being told. She remembered which porcelain set his mother used for invited guests, and which for family. She sent seasonal fruit baskets with handwritten cards. At Chuseok, she helped fold songpyeon dough in the kitchen, beside women who had already decided they would never forgive her for existing in the wrong body in the right room. Madame Kang watched all of it with the expression of a queen inspecting an actor who had mistaken rehearsal for acceptance. The older woman never yelled. Women like her did not need volume. She used temperature instead. A delayed response, a too long glance, a correction disguised as etiquette. A remark placed so neatly it took a minute to realize it was meant to wound. "You speak Korean beautifully," she said once over lunch, almost like someone raised to it. Another evening, when Amara wore a hanbok for a formal family memorial, Madame Kong adjusted the collar with two cold fingers and said, "Some clothes carry history better than others." Jun Seo heard those lines. Sometimes he responded with a stare his mother ignored. Sometimes he changed the subject. Sometimes, and this was worse, he told Amara later, "You know how she is. Don't give it weight." But cruelty grows fastest when the people closest to it call it normal. And there was another man in the house who understood that very well. Kang Minjai was Jun Seo's cousin, 6 years younger, immaculate in public, venomous in private, the sort of man who preferred to ruin lives through committee language and smiling photographs. He ran the legal and philanthropic side of the family empire, which made him appear civilized to outsiders and far more dangerous to the people who knew better. He never insulted Amara directly. He did something smarter. He fed the family's worst instincts while keeping his hands clean. At board dinners, he would mention succession law with lazy timing. At foundation events, he would steer journalists toward questions about legacy and traditional lineage. At private family gatherings, he would tell Madame Kang about old donors concerned for the stability of the Kang name. He did not need to say Amara was the problem. He only needed to build a room where everyone else would think it for him. And that's when the pressure stopped being social and started becoming strategic. One winter evening, the Kang family hosted a formal dinner in the Hanok Annex behind the main house, the room reserved for matters that touched both reputation and blood. The low tables were arranged with ceremonial precision, silver chopsticks aligned, brass bowls gleaming, the eldest seated first, juniors waiting, the kind of setting where every posture was a sentence. Amara arrived in a dark navy dress and pearl earrings Jun Seo had once chosen because he said they looked like restraint turned beautiful. She bowed to the elders. Jun Seo took his place beside her. Madame Kang sat at the head of the table. Minjai sat 2 places down, smiling the smile of a man who always looked like he already knew tomorrow's damage report. The first half hour passed in controlled politeness. Soup, fish, rice, questions about charitable commitments, a brief discussion of a museum partnership. Then one of the older aunts asked whether Amara planned to continue working after children. The table quieted in the way powerful tables do when everyone wants the same answer, but no one wants to own the question. Amara set down her spoon. "If I have children," she said evenly, "I plan to raise them in a home where they know both love and dignity." Madame Kang lifted one brow. "Dignity is not a substitute for structure." Amara met her gaze. "No, but structure without dignity becomes fear." The room changed. Not dramatically, just enough. A tiny shift in breath, a pause too long before the next dish was served. Minjai lowered his eyes to hide his satisfaction. Jun Seo saw it and still said nothing. Later that night, in the car back to his residence, Amara watched the city slide past in reflected light and asked quietly, "When your mother speaks to me like that, what exactly are you protecting?" He answered too fast. "Peace." She turned to look at him, not angry, just tired in a way that should have frightened him more than tears ever could have. "No," she said, "you're protecting comfort. Yours." He did not respond, because he did not yet have the courage to see himself clearly. Remember that line. It mattered more than the wedding vows. The breaking point came on the anniversary of Junseo's father's death, a day his mother treated like law. The memorial was private, traditional, exact. Shoes removed, voices softened, fruit stacked by color and height, incense placed at precise angles. Even grief had a seating arrangement in that house. Amara had asked in advance how to help. She had dressed conservatively, pinned her hair back, and memorized the ritual order because she respected the dead, even if the living did not respect her. Junseo watched her move through the room that morning with composed care, and for one dangerous moment, he believed effort might finally soften fate. It didn't. A brass cup slipped. That was all. A small thing. A servant had placed it too near the table edge. Amara turned with a tray. The sleeve of her jacket brushed it, and the cup rolled onto the floor with a sharp metallic ring that shattered the silence like a warning no one deserved to misunderstand. The room froze. Madame Kang stood slowly. "Do you understand what day this is?" Amara bowed her head. "I'm sorry. It was an accident." Minjae sighed softly, like a disappointed witness. One of the aunts murmured that foreigners did not understand ancestral discipline. Another said some women brought disorder simply by entering the wrong family. Amara looked at Junseo, and here was the whole tragedy in 1 second. She did not look at him for rescue because she was weak. She looked because a wife should not have to defend her humanity alone in her husband's house. Madame Kang stepped closer. "If you understand the gravity of disrespect," she said, voice thin with control, "then kneel and apologize properly." The servants stopped moving. The incense smoke curled upward between them like something ancient and unforgiving. Amara did not kneel immediately. She looked at Junseo again. He could feel every eye in the room measuring him against his mother, against tradition, against the unspoken rules that had governed his body since childhood. In that house, he had learned early that defying Madame Kang was not disagreement. It was treason. It was fracture. It was war at the table before the meal was even served. So he made the choice weak men in powerful bodies make all the time. He stood still. Not because he agreed, not because he wanted to hurt her, because he wanted the moment to end without costing him the courage he had never practiced. Amara saw it, every terrible inch of it. Then, with a dignity that made everyone else in that room look small, she lowered herself to the floor. Her knees touched the polished wood. Her hands flattened once in front of her. She bowed. "I apologize," she said. Madame Kang accepted it in silence. But something irreversible happened right there, quietly, cleanly, permanently. Love did not always die with betrayal shouted across a room. Sometimes it died when the person who promised to protect it looked away while it was made to kneel. That night, Amara did not scream. She did not throw things. She did not ask whether he loved her. By then, the better question had become irrelevant. She packed one suitcase. Junseo found her in the dressing room folding a cream sweater she had worn on a trip to Socho once, back when the future still looked like something two people could make instead of survive. "You're leaving," he said. She did not look up. Yes. It was one incident. That was what he said. One incident. Men destroy entire worlds with words that small. Amara zipped the suitcase closed and finally faced him. Her eyes were dry. That was the most frightening part. "No," she said. "It was the first moment I stopped lying to myself." He stepped forward. "You know what that house is. You know how my mother—" She cut him off with a softness that hurt more than anger. "I knew how your mother was. I did not know how you were." There was no answer to that, only truth. She removed her ring then, not with drama, not with trembling fingers. She placed it on the dresser between them like a receipt for something broken beyond return. "You don't lose people all at once, Junseo," she said. "You lose them in the moments you teach them they are alone." Then she left. No slammed doors, no final performance, just absence. And that wasn't even the worst part. 3 days later, in a clinic far from the Kang name and the people attached to it, Amara sat alone in a white room, while a doctor with kind eyes and a practiced smile looked at the screen, then looked back at her with surprise. "Well," the doctor said gently, "that explains the fatigue." Amara swallowed. "Is the baby okay?" The doctor laughed once, warm and startled. "Babies. There are 3. For a moment, the room seemed to lose sound entirely. 3. Not one heartbeat to protect. 3. 3 futures. 3 fragile lives connected to a man whose world measured bloodline like currency and weakness like opportunity. 3 children who would not be seen as children by that family, not at first. They would be seen as leverage, inheritance, vulnerability, scandal, strategy. And sitting there alone with the printout in her shaking hands, Amara understood something with perfect, brutal clarity. If she told Junseo now, she would not be inviting him into fatherhood. She would be opening a door into a war. So she made her own choice. She vanished properly, not carelessly, not romantically, strategically. She sold what she could without leaving a pattern. She left Seoul under a quiet work transfer arranged by an old university friend in Singapore. She changed apartments twice in the first 6 months. She kept no public social media. She gave no forwarding number to anyone tied to the Kang family. Her prenatal records were filed under a shortened legal name. She learned how to build safety out of routine and invisibility. She threw up in taxis, cried in supermarket aisles, worked until she physically could not, and then kept going because there was no one to collapse into. Pregnancy with triplets was not cinematic. It was exhaustion sharpened into discipline, back pain, fear at 3 a.m., hospital forms, budget calculations, quiet panic when one bill looked too large, hunger that came with nausea, nights when she lay awake in a too small apartment, one hand over the hard curve of her belly, whispering to the lives inside her that she was trying. She was trying. She was trying. But here was the part nobody back in Seoul would have understood. She was also getting stronger. Not loudly, not in the kind of way men notice and call defiance. In the truer way. The way a woman grows when she stops waiting for someone else's permission to feel safe. She found community where pride would never have thought to look. A Ghanaian Korean nurse who brought her soup after long shifts. a widowed Singaporean landlady who pretended not to notice when Amara paid rent a little late the first month. A Filipino preschool teacher downstairs who taught her how to swaddle 3 babies with military efficiency and zero sentimentality. Women who did not ask her to prove she belonged before handing her help with both hands. By the time labor came, Amara was no longer the woman who had knelt on polished wood in Seoul. She was a woman who had built a life out of bruised dignity and unfinished sleep. When the triplets were born, the hospital room filled not with dramatic music or grand declarations, but with the ordinary holy chaos of new life. One cry, then another, then a third. She laughed and cried at once because there was no cleaner way for the body to tell the truth than that. A nurse placed the first baby in her arms, a girl with fierce little lungs and a crease between her brows like she had already begun judging the world. Then came the boy, solemn and warm, fingers opening and closing against the blanket. Then the third, smaller than the others but stubborn from the beginning, who turned her face toward Amara's voice as if memorizing it. Nia, Min, Yuna, 3 names chosen for sound, meaning, and breath, purpose, brightness, enduring grace. She looked at them and understood that love could arrive after ruin and still not feel like a replacement for what was lost. It felt like a command. Protect them. And if you've ever survived something by becoming practical before you became healed, then you already know what came next. Work. Feeding schedules taped to the refrigerator. Second-hand double strollers because triple strollers were impossible on narrow sidewalks. Accounts balanced at midnight. A small educational consulting business built during nap times and after bedtime. First from one client, then 5, then 12, until her quiet intelligence became revenue and her revenue became stability. The children grew in the middle of that practical miracle. Nia walked first and hated being told no. Min loved order, numbers, stacking cups by size. Yuna was slower to trust strangers but the first to notice when anyone else was sad. They learned songs in English and Korean. They learned that home could be tiny and still be whole. They learned that their mother's exhaustion never once meant they were unloved. Amara kept one locked box in the back of her wardrobe. In it were her old wedding ring, 2 photographs she never looked at for long, and a single newspaper clipping from Seoul she could not quite bring herself to throw away. Not because she still wanted him, because forgetting and healing are not the same thing. 3 years passed. In Seoul, Jun Seo's empire expanded exactly the way empty men like to tell themselves success should. His legal holdings deepened. His offshore risks thinned. Politicians answered calls. Rivals recalculated before moving against him. He became cleaner in public, more feared in private, colder in ways that made his own men stand straighter without understanding why. And still, something in his life remained unfinished. It showed up in the pauses, the extra second before he entered a room, the way he sometimes found himself staring at families crossing intersections under umbrellas. The smallest child held between 2 adults like the whole city had no permission to touch them. He never remarried. He refused every strategic match floated by the board, by donors, by his mother. He called it inconvenience. Minjae called it sentiment in a better suit. Madame Kang called it stubbornness. None of them named it correctly. Regret is not always loud. Sometimes it just drains the victory out of winning. His mother felt it too, though pride made her slow to admit anything. The house had become quieter since Amara left. Even the staff changed around that silence. Less warmth in the kitchen. Fewer flowers in the west corridor. Nobody laughing softly with the younger maids while folding laundry. It took Madame Kang years to understand that order had not made the house stronger. It had only made it emptier. Then, one spring afternoon, while reviewing a charitable education grant application from Singapore, she saw a photograph. A woman seated at a child-sized table, helping 3 toddlers finger paint paper lanterns. The caption identified the center director as Amara Johnson. Beside her were 3 children with dark curls, serious eyes, and one unmistakable thing no paper could disguise. Kang blood. Madame Kang stared at the page, so long her tea went cold. She traveled 2 weeks later without telling Jun Seo. No aides beyond Attorney Han. No press. No family notice. She went as an older woman in a clean beige coat and pearl earrings, carrying pride like luggage she had not yet agreed to set down. Amara received her in a modest office above the learning center, sunlight falling over low bookshelves, children's drawings taped unevenly to the walls. There were no servants, no family portraits, no polished wood floors reflecting hierarchy back at itself, just a life built by hand. The triplets were napping in the next room. Madame Kang said, "I came to see my grandchildren." Amara answered, "You came to see whether they were real." The older woman flinched. Barely, but enough. Then, for the first time in more years than anyone could remember, Madame Kang asked for something, without demanding it. "Let me meet them." Amara stood by the window for a long moment. Singapore traffic hummed far below. Somewhere down the hall, a child laughed in sleep and turned over. When she finally spoke, her voice carried no bitterness, which made the truth land harder. "You made me kneel in your house," she said. "Your son watched. Then you both let me disappear as if I had been an inconvenience in good fabric. So understand this clearly. You do not arrive now and step into their lives because blood suddenly made me useful." Madame Kang's face tightened. She had not come prepared for plain truth. People in Seoul usually wrapped hard things in silk before handing them to her. "What do you want?" she asked. Amara turned. "Nothing from you that I cannot walk away from." Those might have been the most expensive words anyone had ever spoken to Madame Kang. But time had already done what pride could not stop. She was no longer facing the daughter-in-law she once believed she could discipline into place. She was facing a woman who had survived outside the reach of the Kang name and did not seem particularly impressed by it anymore. So Madame Kang did the impossible. She bowed her head. Not fully, not yet, but enough to feel humiliation scrape against the inside of her own bones. "Please," she said. That afternoon, she met the children. Nia hid first, then came out when bribed with a tangerine slice. Min studied her shoes and asked why older Korean ladies always smelled like flowers and serious decisions. Yuna touched the silk sleeve of Madame Kang's jacket and asked, "Are you lonely?" The older woman nearly broke right there, because children do not know how to flatter power. They only know how to expose it. She returned to Seoul altered and furious about it. Not at Amara, at herself, and at the family machinery that had once seemed righteous to her. She began reviewing internal files more carefully. She noticed how often Minjae's recommendations aligned with outcomes that isolated Jun Seo from independent counsel. She noticed how many donor concerns about lineage optics had originated not from old families, but from memos authored quietly through Minjae's office. She noticed a pattern she should have seen years earlier. By the time Jun Seo received the emergency call that rainy evening, his mother had already made one private arrangement. She had asked Amara to come to Seoul for formal legal negotiations before Minjae could move first, because he had found out. Not about Singapore in detail, not yet, but enough. A flagged transfer tied to an educational trust, a discreet investigator, a school registration inquiry that should never have reached Seoul, but did. Minjae had followed the thread and realized what it meant immediately. 3 unknown heirs. 3 children who could reorder inheritance, public image, board control, and family leverage in a single quarter. He did not want them safe, he wanted them useful. That was why Amara had agreed to fly back. Not for nostalgia, not for closure, and certainly not for Jun Seo. For terms. Attorney Han placed the sealed folder on the tea table between them in the east parlor. There has been movement through Director Kong Min-jae's office, he said. 2 tabloid editors have already been contacted. 1 family registry consultant has been approached. If this becomes public without preparation, there will be media harassment, succession challenges, and likely attempts at temporary custodial leverage under the excuse of family interest. Amara's jaw tightened once. Jun Seo noticed, because he had once known every version of her silence. His mother said, "I brought them here first because the house is secure." Amara answered without turning. "This house is the reason security became necessary." A fair hit. It landed. The children had grown bored with adult tension and resumed playing. Min was building a tower now, serious and methodical. Nia had acquired a silk cushion and declared it a mountain. Yuna sat near the window with a picture book, quietly watching everyone as if cataloging who could be trusted with what kind of truth. Jun Seo looked at them too long. Then Amara said the line that made him understand exactly where he stood. "You are not meeting them as their father tonight." He faced her. "What does that mean?" "It means you do not get language you have not earned." No one in the room tried to interrupt. Not even Madame Kang, Amara continued, calm and surgical. "For now, you are Mr. Kang. You will not tell them who you are until legal protections are in place. You will not remove them from my sight. You will not bring family members, board representatives, or security close enough to frighten them. You will not use gifts to buy comfort. You will not touch paperwork related to them unless my attorney sees it first. And if you raise your voice even once in front of them, this ends." There it was, the first boundary, the first locked gate, the first phase of a story. Men like Jun Seo were never trained to survive. Restricted access. He could have refused. 3 years earlier, he might have. He might have thrown authority across the room and mistaken obedience for resolution. Instead, he asked, "If I agree?" Amara looked at him with a stillness that forced honesty out of the air itself. Then you get 10 supervised minutes tonight. 10 minutes. Kang Jun-seo had taken ports, companies, loyalty chains, and men's futures with less negotiation than that. Yet in that moment, 10 minutes felt bigger than every contract he had ever signed. He said, "I agree." That was the first mini payoff, though nobody called it that inside the room. Power had changed shape, and for once, he had not tried to crush it back into something familiar. The first meeting lasted 8 minutes, not 10. Nia asked whether he was famous because he looked like the men on television who never smiled. Min offered him a wooden tiger and stared hard when he took it carefully with both hands. Yuna sat in Amara's lap, clutching the picture book, and said nothing at all until the last minute, when she whispered, "Your eyes look sad." He had no answer. When the time was up, Amara stood. "That's enough." Jun-seo rose immediately. No argument, no bargaining, no stretching the moment because he wanted more than the rules allowed. The children went with a nanny toward the West guest suite, prepared for them. Nia waved because she waved at everyone. Min did not. Yuna looked over Amara's shoulder once as they left. And that should have been a small thing. It wasn't. Because children notice restraint almost as quickly as they notice danger. Later that night, alone in the study he had once used as a teenager to hide from his mother's expectations, Jun-seo stood at the window with the city bleeding light beneath the hill, and finally let the truth arrive, without defense. 3 years, 3 children, and every version of this pain led back to one moment in one room where he had chosen stillness over courage. His mother entered without knocking, the old habit unchanged even now. She did not sit. "You will do exactly as she says," Madame Kang said. He turned slowly. "Now you care what she says." His mother absorbed the blow. "Now I understand the cost of not caring." There was no elegance in that admission, no strategy, just age and truth colliding too late. Jun-seo's mouth hardened. "You made her kneel." "Yes. You destroyed my marriage." "No," Madame Kang said, and for a dangerous second, he thought she might still be reaching for control. Then she finished. "I gave you the test. You failed it." The room went cold. Because sometimes the cruelest people tell the truth with terrifying accuracy. But that wasn't the end of the damage. The next morning, a black sedan without Kong plates lingered too long outside the estate gates. A freelance photographer, paid through 2 shell transfers and a dummy consulting account. Attorney Han caught it within the hour. By lunch, a gossip site had posted a blind item about unregistered heirs connected to a major Seoul family. The names were omitted. The timing was not. Minjai had started the fire. Jun-seo moved before the first spark found oxygen, not recklessly, not loudly. He ordered a digital trace through a media risk team he normally reserved for political blackmail cases. He used legitimate holding companies to bury the search path. He had 3 dummy family movements staged from different properties before sunset. He reassigned estate staff in layers, so no single person knew where the children would sleep that night. By evening, injunction paperwork was ready to block publication of identifiable minors' images. By midnight, the gossip editor's parent debt, long buried and very inconvenient, had been quietly purchased by a creditor now loyal to Jun Seo. No threats, no visible violence. Just pressure applied where careless men left weak seams. Amara watched the entire operation from the library table, where the children colored lions and moons on butcher paper. She saw him work through counsel, not temper. She saw him ask her before moving the children's schedule. She saw him send the extra security team away when Nia became frightened by the uniforms. She saw him kneel, not to a person, not ceremonially, but to Min's level so he could explain why some adults might take their picture and why they would use a different car for a while. "Is it because we did something bad?" Min asked. "No," Jun Seo said. "It's because some adults forget children are not stories for other people to own." That answer changed something small and important. Trial upgrades never look dramatic when they are real. They look like consistency. That evening, after the children were asleep, Amara found him in the corridor outside their suite, tie loosened, phone dark in his hand, as if he had forgotten how to leave. "I've changed tomorrow's arrangement," she said. He looked up. "You can have breakfast with them. 20 minutes, supervised." It was not forgiveness. It was not softness. It was phase 2. And if you're keeping count, yes, trust was being measured now in minutes, meals, and whether a man could keep his ego from spilling into the room before the children finished their fruit. Breakfast happened in the glass breakfast room overlooking the garden, where rain had washed the stone lanterns clean overnight. The children were less shy in daylight. Nia declared immediately that Mr. Kang poured juice too slowly. Min wanted to know why his watch had no cartoon on it. Yuna examined the strawberries with solemn suspicion before deciding they were acceptable if sliced correctly. Jun Seo, who had once handled negotiations with ministers and smugglers in the same day without blinking, found himself taking instructions from 3 small people with jelly on their sleeves, and obeying them. That was the point. Amara sat at the far end of the table, pretending to review messages. In truth, she watched every detail, whether he corrected too sharply, whether impatience flickered, whether he tried to claim emotional ground he had not earned. He did none of it. When Min dropped a fork, Jun Seo picked it up and called for another without annoyance. When Nia reached across the table too fast and nearly tipped her milk, he steadied the glass but let her regain control of it herself. When Yuna refused to speak, he did not force interaction just to reassure himself. He adapted. By the 4th breakfast, Nia had started saving him the last tangerine segment. If you're nice. Min let him help with a block puzzle. Yuna still said almost nothing, but once, as Amara buttoned her coat before taking them out, the little girl walked up to Jun Seo, pressed a sticker star onto the back of his hand, and went right back to her mother, as if she had not just altered the man's internal weather for the rest of the day. Mini payoff. Tiny, devastating, enough. Still, pressure was building elsewhere. Min-jae requested an emergency succession review through the legitimate corporate board, citing potential undisclosed heirs as a reputational risk requiring immediate family clarification. He never named the children. He didn't need to. The message was clear. If Jun Seo hesitated, the story would be framed without him. If he moved too fast, the children could be swallowed by a spectacle they never chose. At the same time, old social alliances began probing Madame Kang discreetly. Was the family acknowledging the children? Was their mother suitable for public association? Would there be registry action? Was Chairman Kang still available for the strategic marriage rumored with the Haiyan Group daughter? Seoul elite society had an elegant way of weaponizing curiosity until it became coercion. Amara heard enough to make her jaw set harder each day. One afternoon, after a secure play session at a private indoor garden space, arranged under false booking names, they returned to find a gift display in the West Hall. Designer toys, imported clothes, a gold charm bracelet too expensive for a child and too calculated not to offend. No card. Amara did not need one. "Your mother?" Jun Seo asked. She gave him a look so flat it almost made him ashamed of the question. "No, your cousin." He stared at the display. Every item screamed narrative control, air branding, familiarization through luxury, the first step in turning children into symbols. He called Attorney Han. "Remove it. Inventory every piece. Trace the vendor accounts and bill Min-jae personally. Double the harassment filing." Amara folded her arms. "That's not enough." He looked at her. "Then tell me what is." She held his gaze. "Stop responding to him like this is only business. He is testing whether you still value image over people." Jun Seo went still, because once again she had found the precise wound without raising her voice. That night, he requested a meeting with Min-jae on neutral ground, an executive lounge above a private bank in Uido, where city lights looked expensive enough to forgive anything. Min-jae arrived smiling, cufflinks perfect, posture relaxed in the infuriating way of men who have mistaken subtlety for innocence. "You've been busy," Jun Seo said. Min-jae poured tea. "So have you. Children change the shape of urgency, I hear. Say their names, and I will remove your ability to say anything else in this city." Min-jae laughed softly. "You always become dramatic when something matters." Then he leaned back and let the polish slip just enough to reveal the blade underneath. "You should thank me," he said. "If I hadn't found the thread, someone less manageable would have. You think those children can remain hidden? In your world? In this family? They're already an event, Hyung. The only question is whether you control the story or lose the board." Jun Seo's expression did not move. Min-jae continued. "There are investors, donors, political handlers, traditional families, your mother's peers, a mixed foreign wife you abandoned, 3 unregistered heirs born in secret overseas. Do you understand what that becomes if it breaks badly? Not romance, not redemption, instability. And your solution? Simple. Private settlements, separate trusts, limited visibility. Do not publicize paternity until we've structured the narrative. The mother remains outside official family presentation. The children can be acknowledged later, selectively. Later, selectively. In other words, hide them until the empire could digest them without consequence." Jun Seo asked one question. "Did you start the blind item?" Min-jae smiled into his tea. "I started your deadline." That was all Jun Seo needed. By the next morning, Min-jae's financial permissions inside 2 charitable subsidiaries had been frozen pending review. 3 board members loyal to old patronage networks received anonymous reminders about an embezzlement probe that had never reached court, but could. A tax irregularity tied to a consultant Minjay trusted appeared on the desk of a man who disliked being embarrassed. Again, no theatrics, no broken windows. Just the removal of comfort from a man who had built his courage on the assumption that Jun Seo would always choose elegance over impact. When news reached Amara, she listened without visible approval. Then she said, "Good, but if you want Phase 3, don't win because you're angry. Win because they are safe." He asked quietly, "There's a Phase 3? A faint pause. "Don't make me regret saying that. You see how dangerous hope becomes when it arrives in measured doses?" That line stayed with him all day. The move to Phase 3 came from Yuna. The smallest triplet developed a fever that evening. Not severe, but enough to turn her cheeks pink and make her cling to Amara's shoulder with that limp, overheated heaviness that terrifies even experienced parents. Their secure pediatrician could come only after an hour. The children had already been moved once too often that week because of leak precautions, and Amara was running on the kind of tension that makes even steady hands start to shake when nobody is looking. Junseo found her in the guest suite kitchenette, trying to prepare electrolyte water while answering a call from the doctor and stopping Nia from climbing a chair all at once. "Let me take Min and Nia," he said. She almost refused from reflex. Then Yuna whimpered and reached tighter around her neck. Min had begun asking too many worried questions. Nia sensed the room turning fragile and was doing what brave children often do when they are scared, becoming louder. Amara closed her eyes once, opened them. Chose. "Take them to the library," she said. "No sugar, no screens, and keep Min from catastrophizing." For a second, he actually almost smiled. That last instruction is genetically ambitious. She did not smile back, but the corner of her mouth threatened something human. Phase 3 began in a library filled with rain light and children's anxiety. Junseo built a blanket fort between two armchairs because Nia demanded a mountain cave. He let Min line up medicine bottles by height, even though they were empty sample containers and not toys. He read the same picture book 3 times because neither child wanted to ask whether Yuna would be okay. When Nia finally fell asleep sprawled across his thigh like a tiny conqueror, he stopped turning pages and just sat there, looking at the weight of a child who trusted sleep enough to surrender to it. Amara saw him like that when she came to the doorway an hour later. Hair slightly out of place, tie gone. One sleeping child, one worried boy leaning into his side. A storybook open in his hand, as if this had always been something he knew how to do. The image hit her in a place she had kept guarded with discipline, because this gentle competence without spectacle, was the man she had once believed existed beneath the armor. Yuna's fever broke before midnight. The pediatrician reassured them. The worst passed quietly. After the children slept, Amara stood in the corridor outside the room and said, "You can come to the apartment tomorrow." He looked up sharply. "Your apartment?" "In Seongsu. Temporary lease. The children know it. It's their space. You will see them there, not only here." That was no small upgrade. That was inner life access. And inside that invitation was a risk she had not taken since she left him, letting him see the life she had built without him. The apartment was on the top floor of a renovated brick building above a floral studio and a tiny bakery that opened before sunrise. It was not grand, it was warm. Bookshelves with actual fingerprints on them, a toy kitchen by the window, children's drawings taped to the refrigerator with alphabet magnets, a row of tiny shoes by the door beside Amara's boots. The whole place smelled faintly of cinnamon, laundry soap, and the lived-in truth of people who belonged there. Jun Seo removed his shoes and stepped inside like a man entering sacred ground. He noticed everything: the bilingual labels on toy bins, the framed print of a Seoul alley in spring beside a woven textile from Guyana, the low table where 3 bowls were already set, the way the apartment made space for both worlds without asking either to shrink. Amara caught him looking. "They will know all of themselves," she said, before he could ask. "Not the version your family finds convenient." He nodded once. "They should." She studied him for a second, maybe because agreement from him used to come cheap and action used to come late. Dinner that night was simple: galbi jim, rice, spinach side dish, sliced pears. Not performance food, family food. Nia talked with her mouth too full until corrected. Min wanted everything on separate sections of the plate. Yuna sat close to Amara, but kept glancing at Jun Seo when she thought no one noticed. At one point, Min asked, "Mr. Kang, did you have a mother when you were little?" Amara nearly choked on water. Jun Seo answered without humor, "Yes." "Was she strict?" A pause. "Yes." Nia frowned. "Stricter than Mama?" He glanced at Amara. "Different." And there, in a kitchen with soup steam on the windows and small hands leaving rice grains on the table, the story stopped being about access alone and started becoming about inheritance in the real sense. Not property, pattern, what gets passed down when nobody interrupts it. Later, after the children were asleep in the room they shared, 3 small beds, 3 nightlights, 3 stuffed animals lined like sentries, Amara stood at the sink washing bowls. Jun Seo dried them because she let him. The city outside was muted under drizzle. Somewhere below, the bakery's morning prep had begun. Faint trays and metal sounds rising through the floor. "This is the part where most men apologize," she said. He set a bowl down carefully. "Most men apologize to be let back in." She turned off the tap and faced him. "And you?" His answer took a moment because, for once, he was not choosing the most efficient sentence. He was choosing the truest one. "I need you to know exactly what I did," he said. "Not just that I'm sorry. I told myself I was keeping peace. I told myself if I challenged my mother in that room, everything would fracture. But that wasn't courage. It was obedience, dressed up as control. I spent my whole life learning how to master every room except the first one I ever lived in. When she told you to kneel, I did what I had always done with her. I froze. And you paid for it." Amara said nothing, so he kept going, because some confessions are owed in full. "I didn't lose you because my world was hard. I lost you because I was a coward in the one moment being your husband actually required courage. Then when you left, I called it one incident because if I named it correctly, I would have had to live with what that made me. There it was. No excuse. No mother blame. No appeal for mercy. Just a man finally admitting that the architecture of his power had always hidden one rotten beam. Amara looked down once, then back at him. Her expression had softened in a way that was almost more painful than anger, because it carried knowledge instead of heat. "I wanted you to say that 3 years ago," she said. "I know. I would have stayed if you had crossed that room." "I know." Her voice went quieter. "And that's the problem. Because truth arriving late does not become less true. It simply becomes heavier." She picked up the dish towel from the counter and handed it to him. "Dry your hands, then leave before I confuse honesty with repair." He obeyed. Outside the apartment, he stood in the hallway longer than necessary, staring at the closed door and realizing that for the first time in his life, being let out without being rejected felt like progress. Midway through the second week, the storm widened. A major financial paper published a sanitized feature on succession planning among Korea's old families, including an unnamed paragraph about private offshore births linked to a prominent legacy house. Still no direct identification, still no photos. But the circle was tightening. The board called for clarity. Political allies began making distance. Min-jae requested a special family council through senior elders. Amara read the article over black coffee and said, "He wants us reactive." Jun Seo nodded. "He wants you hidden and the children delayed into strategy." She folded the paper once. "Then stop meeting him in rooms," he arranged. That advice altered the next move. Instead of responding through the board first, Jun Seo went where the old families actually measured permanence, the family registry and trust structure. Quietly, through independent counsel, he prepared 3 irrevocable protections for the children: identity privacy orders, education trusts beyond board control, and a custody firewall preventing any extended family claim absent maternal consent. If anyone tried to weaponize lineage, they would first hit a legal wall built under Amara's terms. He brought the documents to her apartment himself. She read every line, every clause, every signature placement, every detail that would have slipped past. Wives expected to feel grateful instead of vigilant. When she finished, she asked, "Why is Madame Kang excluded from interim guardianship?" He answered plainly, "Because you didn't ask for her." Amara looked at him for a long time. Then she signed the first page. Mini payoff, not romance, trust. Real trust is never one big gesture. It is a series of smaller ones that survive scrutiny. That evening, as the children drew marker constellations on butcher paper taped to the floor, Nia crawled into Jun Seo's lap like it was the most obvious place in the world to sit. Min showed him a tower and asked if buildings were difficult to trust. Yuna brought over a blanket and put it beside him instead of beside Amara. Tiny kingdom. Tiny surrender. And because stories like this should never let you breathe too long, that was exactly when the next blow landed. A woman from Amara's Singapore center called in panic. Someone had been asking questions there using false press credentials, staff names, the children's previous routines, travel dates, which parks they liked. Nothing illegal yet. Just the slow, horrifying shape of someone building a pattern. Amara went cold all over. Jun Seo saw it instantly. "They won't get near them." "You can't promise that." "No," he said. but I can stop the pattern from being useful. That night, he moved the fight outside the family and into the channels where men like Minjai felt strongest. He leaked evidence of consultancy irregularities to the internal ethics unit of the charitable network Minjai curated for public prestige. He arranged for one of Minjai's donor allies to discover they had been quietly recorded promising preferential access in exchange for influence. He gave the appearance of nothing while removing the floor beneath an entire polished ecosystem. Then he did something Amara did not expect. He moved himself out of the most protected suite in the Kang estate and into a smaller annex office closer to the outer grounds, so the children's route would remain undisclosed even to inner staff. "You don't need to do that," she said when Attorney Han mentioned it. "I know," Jun Seo answered. "That's why it matters." It did. And here, somewhere around this point, let me ask you the question this story demands. If the person who failed you once began protecting your children with real consistency years later, would you give him access one careful inch at a time? Or would you keep every door locked forever? Sit with that, because Amara had to. The answer did not come in theory. It came in a moment of ordinary tenderness. 3 nights later, the city lost power for 11 seconds during a summer storm surge. Only 11. But for children already living inside adult tension, darkness can feel much longer. Nia yelled first. Min panicked second. Yuna,